Welcome to Periodic Tables, our first Periodic Tables of the 2017-18 academic year. My name is Misha Angrist. I'm from the Duke Initiative for Science and Society. We're really excited both for Sönke Johnsen, who's going to wow your visual cortex, and the other stuff we have coming up this fall. And I'll just limit my remarks to next month, Tuesday, October 10th, we're going to have Nicole Kalakos from Duke Neurology, and she's going to talk about mind over matters, how habits change the brain, and she will talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of habits, and what changes in our brain happen when we develop them. So please come back for that. So, Sönke Johnsen, he's my colleague at Duke, but I never actually met him before this evening. He's, I don't know if he's unusual, but he's very committed to public engagement, and so we are preternaturally drawn to him because we like interacting with the public and talking about science with the public. He was originally trained in mathematics and art, and he has studied camouflage, signaling, and non-human visual modalities for the last 25 years. And because I don't want to preempt him or steal his thunder, that's all I'm going to tell you about him. So please welcome Sönke Johnsen.
To the left or right side. I don't want to block my own stuff. Okay. All right, that's good. Can everybody hear me? Yep. Okay. So, thanks for coming. Thanks for hearing me. This is a slightly different talk than I usually give. I usually give straight up science talks or whatever. But this particular talk, which I've given once before, actually at MotorCo about a year ago, grew out of sort of a lot of discussions and thoughts that I had about my brother. So this is me and my brother. We had only about a year or so before that immigrated to America on an ocean liner, if you can believe it. I was actually nailed to the deck of the ship in an orange crate with a pillow. And my parents came in two big steamer trunks with two big steamer trunks, and essentially no money. We came to America sort of one of those like, let's see what happens sort of things. My dad actually thought he was going to be a postdoc in physics, and he showed up and the guy I was supposed to work for had left for Texas about a year before that, which gives you an idea about the rate of communication back then. It was really quite different. And my brother was born soon after that, actually, on U.S. soil. We had very little money of any sort. We were one of those families where in the winter, we would all like put on our hats and coats and jackets and all sleep in the same bed because we didn't actually have any heat and so on. But my parents were both extraordinarily inventive, which really made up for it. So my brother and I never actually felt like we didn't have anything because in many ways we had a lot. So one example of this is, back then, Ma Bell controlled all the phone systems, and you're really only allowed to have one or two phones. But my dad was extraordinarily good at fixing telephones, and actually we didn't have any phones when we started out. But he would wander the neighborhood and find everybody's phones that they had thrown out, and just keep bringing them home, fix them up, and then we had 7 telephones in our house. So we sort of lived like, we were rich because my dad could fix everything. He also built all of our furniture. My mom knitted or sewed most of our clothes, and we grew most of our food. So we lived in this sort of world where we sort of felt like anything was possible and that anything could be done with your hands. It was a really sort of engaged way to live. This is actually my brother and I at a later stage with this seriously bad hairdos in front of our strange urban garden in the middle of Pittsburgh where we were trying to grow corn. And we're each holding giant zucchinis. Believe it or not, this picture was taken without irony or humor. It was actually my mom in particular wanting to show off, I guess, both of our children and their large zucchinis and all corn. So it gives you an idea that we were definitely not the normal kids on the block. So we then both entered college, my brother and I, with this incredibly sort of holistic view of the world, where we felt that, really anything was possible. And so this actually are the career tracks of my brother and I over, this period of time. So for me, I actually started out making labels for trees on a giant diamond labeler buried in a geodesic astronomy dome. Then was a dancer, then a carpenter in all sorts of different ways. Then was teaching dance to 3-year-olds. Believe it or not, ran a daycare, which I don't recommend for anybody. Taught kindergarten, which I liked a lot more. Wrote short stories. Then became a mathematician for the Jeff Goldblum guy for Jurassic Park. Then got into starfish vision, bioluminescence, invisible animals, and eventually became what we usually think of as a scientist. My brother started out looking at graduation photos and taking out everybody's zits. That was his job. Every day he'd come in and he'd spot out all the zits. I said, "What'd you do today?" He goes, "Well, I was spotting." Spotting every single day. And then he had this terrible employer who said, "I'm not sure who I'm going to lay off, so all of you should come in all the way until Christmas Eve." And so they all did, hoping they wouldn't be the one that wouldn't get laid off. And he laid off all of them, so pretty crappy job. Which moved my brother to his second career, which was as a deodorant tester, where literally he had to go up to a wall, this big white wall with holes cut at armpit height, where there were people on the other side like this, and he had to sniff and see how good the deodorant was. Really not a good job. You get money where you can take it. Then he got into making Super 8 movies, and it was actually really brilliant. He made these artistic movies, some of which are actually still in the archives at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. Very good stuff. Then became a saw player, founded an archive, musical saw. And then founded a film archive that also ended up in the Museum of Modern Art called Bourdon. Got into camera repair, analog electronics, electronic musician. Then taught middle school for a while, and now his primary day job is actually designing synthesizers for a company called Pittsburgh Modular. So in many ways, when you look at the nitty-gritty of things we were doing, they were not so different. And so just to sort of give you an example of this is sort of how the world kind of falls out between art and science, where you could be doing things that are quite similar, but in one case it's called art, in the other case it's called science. So sort of jump back and forth. This is art. This is science, and this is art again. The big difference is, for the most part, as my brother says, it's art. It's art because it's in a big plastic case. This actually, he had created a modern version out of the first synthesizer, which is this huge industrial gadget, and he made it out of all of my mom's kitchen utensils, which she was never able to use correctly ever again. And then this gadget here, which I made years ago, is designed to study the vision of different animals by shining light through individual little cells in the retina. So, in many ways, we led a life where we did similar things, had similar talents, and then we ended up on this sort of divide. And the divide became increasingly sort of severe as the years went on. He had access to things that I didn't, and I very much had access to things that he did not. Even though we felt like, we were just the same kind of people. So these are the relative budgets for science and the arts in the United States. I didn't label it. You can pick whichever one you want, make a guess, but pretty much guess what you'll be guessing. And just as sort of an example of that, in general, I get invited to give talks at different universities. When this happens for me, they buy me a plane ticket. They fly me in a nice thing all the way across the country. Maybe they put me in a nice little hotel with the cute little soaps and shampoos and all that sort of thing. And they pay me an honorarium sometimes, a few $100s, and then wine and dine me and all that, and fly me home. My brother gets invited to give a gig, and this can be like in New York City, for the music scene or whatever. And they tell him to find, a megabus, and preferably one of the tickets that's only $5 or $10. He rides the bus for 20 hours through the night. And then generally has to sleep in somebody's basement, maybe with some blankets or maybe not. It's a very unfair system, right? And on top of that, there's sort of this cultural divide, between artists and scientists, which drives me crazy. And neither side really has often a great love for the other, which is so depressing. So you sort of end up with this kind of situation. I love XKCD, the cartoon, because it sort of plays around with this sort of art science division here, where just things don't always happen. So, and then you get this sort of idea about left brain, right brain. That, there are right brain people who are artistic and everything is colors and beauty and esoteric and so on. And then a right brain, you just have a bunch of people grunting through equations or so on. And it's just not really like that. I'd say that both sides are trying very hard to create a story about the world. To take, what people always say, find the simple invisible to explain the complex visible. We do that, in different ways and with some different rules, but we're both trying to do that. And for most of us in both science and art, we're doing a craft. It's technically challenging, whether you're a potter or whether you're an experimental biologist. You're trying to improve, how you do things, sometimes very carefully with your hands. So with that, I'd like to jump into my own work, and in particular, this is not going to be a heavily, sort of scientific talk going to all the details of like different equations or so on and so on, but to give you a sense of sort of the beauty of the animals we get to study, and to talk a little bit about an environment that most of you don't get to see. And again, just sort of one last sort of harping on the art science thing. This watercolor is by a biologist, Alistair Hardy. And its essential purpose at the time it was painted was to record the animals that were seen on the research cruise. It was not meant to be, a beautiful thing to put on a wall or for anybody else to look at. It was for Alistair to remember what all the different parts were in the animals and how they were in relation to each other and so on. And he actually has a book, The Open Sea, which has a number of these just sort of beautiful watercolors of these different animals. So going to the sea. I love the ocean. I love the ocean since I was a little kid. As I mentioned, I grew up in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh, the only nature, especially in the 70s, was squirrels, rats, and dying sycamore trees that were trying desperately to fight their way, through the pollution. And I guess people's pets, but we didn't have pets at the time. So the only time we ever actually got to see nature is when we went to the beach in North Carolina. We go to Kitty Hawk, and actually the first picture is from Kitty Hawk, Killed Hills area. So I was always drawn to the sea because for me it was like the only thing that wasn't like rugby steel mills and like buildings that were like on fire at night, making steel and so on. I mean, it's my, oh my God, the world can be beautiful. It doesn't just have to be like industrial grunge, and that really appealed to me. I also like it because the ocean is very mysterious. When we go look, at the beach, the ocean right now with the big waves coming in from Jose, we can sort of put anything we want into that world because we don't know, most of us, what's actually there. And it turns out to be really difficult. Even getting out, actually on the surface of the ocean in a research vessel is very expensive and logistically sometimes very challenging. And getting below it's even harder. I mean, you have pressure to deal with, you have darkness, you have temperature, a whole lot of other things. And so it's just, we often say, we know more about the surface of the moon than we know about the bottom of the sea. And that's because there's all this water in the way. So I'm going to talk a bit about first the upper levels, and then sort of the medium levels like deep sea, and then going to the sea floor for a bit, and then a bit about bioluminescence near the end, featuring mostly my own photographs, but then some photographs also from other people. We explore the upper level of the water using something called blue water diving, which is just like scuba diving, except you're doing it in the open ocean with no real bottom. The bottom may be 10,000 feet below you. And so if you drop something, it's going to be dropping for hours. I had a guy who would just always drop my stuff. Whenever we were scuba diving, he would borrow something and he'd drop it by mistake. Maybe he did it on purpose, maybe he just hated me, I don't know. And I remember once, it was about 4 o'clock, he dropped something that I really liked. And we finished the dive, got back in the small boat, got back in the big boat, took off all of our dive gear, went and took a shower, sat down for a bit, had dinner, and it was still going down, whatever it is that he had dropped. I mean, it's that deep. So it's kind of spooky, and they hook us up into these lines, into a sort of a trapeze system, and that keeps us from floating away and like never being seen again. And it also keeps us from sinking very, very deep. The water is so clear that you can drop 200 feet down and it won't actually look any darker, except by then you won't ever be able to come to the surface because you'll die at the bends, and so your life's essentially over. So they tie us up so that our life won't be over, and so they can find us if sharks show up or things like that. And then we go around with these little glass jars and cool animals. So some of them are this guy here. This is called Brachistoma. It's a nice little jellyfish, about this big across, really pretty guy. And then also another one is this funny one. For those of you who saw Finding Nemo, this is the jellyfish of Finding Nemo. The beautiful one that's bopping along, and then Nemo has to be saved by the turtles and so on. They do sting, and they're also bioluminescent. They're usually bioluminescent. It's called Pelagian Noctiluca. The weird thing about this, and the reason I showed it, this thing down here is not jellyfish. Normally you should be seeing a couple tentacles coming down here. This is a sea anemone that managed to latch onto this jellyfish, somehow finding the open ocean, and is completely parasitizing it. Anything that comes into this jellyfish or whatever is basically being munched up by this thing. So it's sort of like, you go to parts of labor over there, and there's an alligator with its head completely wrapped around yours, and every time you take a bite, it just shoves it in your mouth. That's your life until you slowly shrivel up and die, walking around with this alligator stuck to your head that probably will eventually digest and last. So it's really beautiful, but at the same time, if you know what it is, it's really disturbing. Then you get this guy here, Oceropsis. It's a comb jelly. What you're actually seeing here are two flaps. There's a flap here and a flap here. It swims just by clapping along like that. Really pretty. They're really, really iridescent. You see them up in the surface layers. Just gorgeous animals. About the size of, sort of like a fist or so. Most of these are about that big. They're not microscopic animals at all. Then you got this one here, which I like a lot. This one's called Corolla, like the Toyota. It's a snail, except it never touches any surface. It never goes to the bottom or anything. And so its feet have turned into two little flapping wings. It flaps around with its shell has lost all of its calcium, and so it's clear, except when you touch it, it gets all these little white dots for reasons that we've never understand. And one neat thing about these guys is the way they eat is they hang upside down. Right now it's sort of right side up. And they spin a 6-foot wide web of snot. And then things just sort of float through the water and periodically get stuck in the snot. And so every now and then this animal will slurp all that snot and all the stuff that's in it back into its mouth, sort out the good parts, and spit all the snot back out. So it's kind of like I used to have this cousin who was a toddler at the time. He would sit in my uncle's lap, and he would just eat all the food and spit it out, eat all the food, spit it out. The whole time my uncle was just eating above, not even looking down, and sort of getting this mixture of this little kid as far as snot and everything else back in the day. So it's a great way of eating if you like it. You get this guy here. This is another snail. It's a nudibranch, and nudibranchs on the coast are these sort of fat little slugs, sort of go around like this, and they're just really cute and super colorful. But this one, living in the ocean, has more or less turned into a fish. It's got a flat body, it's actually got a tail, and it swims like a fish. In other words, you basically watch a snail that has evolved to become a fish. And these guys are also beautifully bioluminescent. You also get octopus. This is an octopus from a coral reef. You see all sort of beautiful, green and other colors. Get lots of nice shrimp. If there's one thing the ocean is full of, it's all kinds of beautiful shrimp. And the ones that actually sort of swim out in the open part, never touch anything, tend to have all these super developed sort of filigree work and all that, probably to keep them from sinking too fast. You get this little guy. I like this little guy. I'm pretty sure my student would know better than I think this is Thor. If it isn't, it looks a lot like Thor. It's Thor, yeah. Good, it's Thor. Okay, this is Thor. And the comical thing about Thor is that Thor is maybe 1/4 of an inch long. So, not that impressive in reality. And they do a little they're also called the sexy shrimp because they do this little butt wiggle thing as their sort of main attraction. So you basically got, Thor is this tiny little shrimp doing a little sexy butt wiggle. More of these sort of open ocean pelagic shrimp with a really long antenna and everything sort of stretched out. This is just sort of a nice little close-up actually of a coral reef shrimp here, sort of staring up at you. There was no reason to take the picture this way. Most of it's out of focus, but I really liked it, so I kind of left it. Then you get this guy. This is the larva of an oarfish. Oarfish were one of the original sea monsters. They're about these 50-foot long, ribbony, silvery fish that people got pretty freaked out about back in the day. But this is a little larva of one, maybe like an inch long or something like that. Really adorable little thing. And then this guy I love. It's called Pristigenes. I don't know if it has any sort of common name, but this guy's tiny. It's maybe like half an inch long or something like that. It swims in the open ocean. So you're in an area, clear blue water. I mean, there's nothing for miles in any direction. And then you have this adorable little tiny, super red little fish, and he's sporting a nice little decoration here on his dorsal fin. I mean, this is like a fish out on the town, right? He's got this beautiful little pattern. I mean, this is obviously, probably for some nice little sexual selection purpose, like, I'm a really, sexy little male Pristigenes here. Swimming around in a world, I mean, it'd be sort of like you in outer space, putting on, your best outfit in case somebody drops by from the moon. I mean, this is a vast, vast ecosphere, even from our standpoint with ships and everything. It's enormously vast when you're half an inch long. But it's always ready, just in case. Just in case, it could happen. And to me, that's just says it all about life. So, going a little bit deeper here, we're going down to the Johnsen Sea Link submersible, a really wonderful craft. The front side is basically like a helicopter bubble. It holds two people. This is the pilot. I'm the one taking the picture. In the back, there's a sort of a more diving bell, traditional structure that holds two more people with that portals that you can look out and so on. This thing, since about the early 70s, did thousands of dives, and we know an incredible amount of what we know about the deep sea because of it. And then in a Florida money scam, it was given for free to a Brazilian oil company who sent it back in pieces. And that was the end of research on that. On the good side, the people who originally designed and put it together built something even neater called the Triton, which hopefully will be going out sometime soon. But actually a lot of the really neat ocean exploration vessels ended up in weird endings. Like one of the earliest submersible that was underneath a roller coaster at Coney Island for decades before somebody found it. So going deeper, again you get more jellies. This one's called Colubanema. I like this one because it's got all the pretty iridescence here. These sort of muscle layers just give this beautiful iridescence. Another one here, I think this one's called Prasada. It's just like a nice mix of sort of iridescent colors and muscle. And you got some little sort of sex organ stuff here, and then the pretty little colored things here. Just really pretty little animal. Another one here is called Aegina citra. Sort of lemon-like color, because that's sort of where the name comes from. You're looking sort of into its gut there. And then this one's actually called Vampiroprasada, the vampire version of that. A lot of deep sea biologists, whenever they want to say something's really deep and really creepy, they add vampire to the front. So that for this one. And this one, it's called Solmissus. Nice deep sea jelly. This one's pretty big, about the size of your palm. Then you get these funny guys. They're called Paraphila, and the nice little sort of main part here where they actually keep all their organs and stuff looks so much like a Hershey's Kiss, you can't stand it. And then it's got these long tentacles. You can't see it in this particular one, but they always have one tentacle that sticks out really long, all the way out there, that it uses to somehow fish with or something of that sort. And they're weird animals in that they're the only one of their genus, and they're really abundant, and they're found everywhere on the planet. It's just one of those ubiquitous animals. You could be in the Indian Ocean, off the coast of Diego Garcia or something like that, and you go trawling, you're going to pull up this guy Paraphila. It's just always there. It's just, I don't know, it's like one of the constants of nature. Then you get this little one that I thought was one thing, and somebody from Russia, actually from Moscow, wrote me yesterday and said, it's not. I had a picture on the internet, and she wrote to inform me that I had the wrong animal. This actually is the larva. A lot of animals have larval forms that are completely different from the adult forms. It's the larva of an anemone that lives in a tube. There are these funny anemones called tube-dwelling anemones, and when you get near them and you touch them, they go whoop, and they pull all the way down your tube, and you don't get to see them. They're really frustrating animals that way. But they have these adorable little kind of chubby little larvae that confuse the heck out of biologists. Because this thing, looks kind of like a jellyfish, it looks kind of like an octopusy kind of thing. And the open ocean is one of those few places where even experienced biologists who've been doing this forever will pull out an animal and says, I have no idea what this thing is. I just have no idea. We didn't either, and we eventually decided it was the baby of the one I just showed you earlier, but the woman from Russia just told me I was wrong, so now I gotta fix it. This guy I really like. It's called Hippopodius, which means like horsefoot, and that's because if you take it apart, each of these little pieces looks just like a horse hoof. But the thing I really like about it is it's normally really clear. In fact, it's clearer than it's looking right now because it's being shot in flash photography. But if you touch it, in about a second or two, it turns white. You just go doink and whoop, you know, I'm here, now I'm white. It sort of decloaks. And then like a few minutes later, it becomes clear, and then you touch it again, whoop, it appears again, I'm here. And then, you know, it goes away again. And there are a whole host of animals out in the open ocean that are transparent, but every time you touch them, they appear, and then they go away. We have like endless beers in different seaports arguing about why they do this, and we have no idea. We like it. I mean, it's great. You swim around scuba diving, you just touch all these guys down the way, and they all disappear. If there were enough of them, you could spell your name. But no idea, absolutely no idea why they do this. It's just one of those like, oh, that's weird. Then you get some of the deeper, this is like that Oceropsis I showed you earlier, the clappy guy. When you get deeper, they get sort of like purplish and reddish to absorb light from basically fish with flashlights that are looking for them. And then they have these beautiful rows of little hairs that are iridescent that they use to propel themselves around. Some of these get pretty big, sort of softball sized. They get pretty hefty.
How deep are you talking?
Right now, we're probably about 2,000 feet. 2,000 feet or so. So pretty deep. I mean, not as deep as you can get, but pretty deep. You get this guy here. I just always love this one because you've got this luscious red color that so many of the deep sea animals have. Because when you're red, you're absorbing tons and tons of light in the blue, and that's what makes you red. And the bioluminescence down there is all blue. And so if anybody's running around with a flashlight trying to see you, it shines on you, even though you're red to us, the blue light goes in and never comes back out. And so it's a really good form of camouflage. And then again, you have these beautiful rows of iridescent hairs that help them move around. And this here is sort of like a tentacle that at the moment is sort of sucked in. Then you get these funny little worms. These guys are called tomopterids. A lot of them are like clear as glass and look like chandeliers sort of roaming in the deep. And they get big. They get to be about 2 feet long or so. Just sort of, you see like, a lot of times you can be in the water and you're surrounded by things that are like occasionally the size of the front end of the submersible. Just transparent, huge, monstrous things just kind of going around. There's this one jellyfish called Deep Staria that looks like the mother of all transparent hefty bags. It just sort of like roams around in front of you. Really impressive. So some of these things do get pretty big. I like this guy a lot. This is an alciopic worm. It's got a couple of funny features. One is all these little red dots along its body. Each one of them releases a yellow dye. And so when you touch it, like all the water around you turns yellow. The dye might be toxic or has some other properties we don't know, but it all comes pouring out. And these things in the front, this head is 2 eyes. That's all its head is. And it's actually the 3rd evolution of a good eyeball in the world. I mean, the other ones are invertebrates, you know, like us. And then in squids and octopus, things of that sort. But weirdly enough, the 3rd version are these weird little worms, which are predatory worms roaming the deep. And the weirdest thing about these eyes is that they see UV light. They have a separate cone, you know, like we have red, blue, and green cones. They have a separate cone that sees UV light. There's no UV light down there. I mean, these guys are like thousands of feet down and they're seeing UV light. We have no idea why. Yet again, you know, we sit around over a bunch of beers and chat about it, and we're like, oh. A lot of science is kind of like that. They always say, like, you know, discovery isn't like going like Eureka. It's like, that's kind of weird. All right. Then you get these guys. It's called Poebius, or Piobius, I always forget which. They're about like 1 inch long. It's basically a living intestinal system. And to be honest, that's all any of us really are. You like take anybody and you sort of squeeze them around pathologically the right way, you're basically a donut. You know, you're basically a tube with a hole at one end and all of the other end and stuff goes in between, and you make the best of it in between. That's life, right? These guys are enormously abundant. Once you get to the right depth, which is like 5,000, 6,000 or more feet. It's like every little bit there's another one of these. They don't do anything. You never see them move, you never see them do anything. They just like live and digest. And so, you know, if like an alien, you know, sort of look like us or whatever, were to come to Earth and like stick out their hand and like grab an animal, not like a bacteria, but an animal you can actually hold in your hand, this is what they find, and this is what they conclude about Earth. That Earth is basically full of these sort of like swimming intestines that do absolutely nothing. These are insanely abundant animals. And you know, one of those things where I once had a student in one of my classes say, well, you know, that's kind of stupid. You know, that's a stupid way to live. My only response is, well, your life is stupid too. I just got really defensive, right? You know, I felt bad afterwards saying that because you're not supposed to tell like an undergrad. Your life is stupid. But I get really touchy about these little guys. It's like, just their life to lead. You want to be a previous, be a previous. Okay. And this is another swimming snail, except this one's got a shell. Shell's right here. It's called Capillinea. It's got a couple cute little tentacles. And then these are its little flapping things. And you can see that the wings here are pretty small relative to the rest of it. So these little poor guys just got to like flap, 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 flap. And one of the hard things about having a life in the open ocean is that you don't want to fall, right? You don't want to go really deep because then it gets really dark, really cold, there's no food and so on. But there's nothing to sit on. I mean, in your entire life, you never get to sit, you never get to rest. And so unless you have some sort of buoyancy trick, your entire life is flap, 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 flap. And until like either you get eaten or you get tired or you die or whatever, time you go. And it's been fun. So it's a tough life. Then you get these guys. This is actually two of the same species. They're called Cleone, Limacina. Their common name is I think they call them the sea angels. And they're really adorable, right? They got these cute little, like short little arms that make you think of babies. They got this nice little round head that make you think of babies. Even got these two little funny red areas that make you think of a cute little baby face. These things are evil. You should, recognize the little horns to sort of like remind you that the whole interior of this thing is a Swiss Army knife of death. These animals, each of the species, are specialized to prey on only one other kind of swimming snail. And those snails that they go after have shells, and the animals can bury themselves in the shells pretty well, so they're hard to get to. And so these guys, when they get near one of those, this whole little cute little face pops open, and a whole bunch of claws and hooks and razor-like things all come out exactly the right shape, just scoop all the way in and like yank out the escargot of these things and devour it. And they can tear through, sort of a suite of these things, pretty impressively. So they're really, instead of like, cute little angels, they're sort of like, like undersea destroyers or something like that. But they are really adorable when they're not like, when you're not like one of those snails about to be Swiss Army. Then you get weird critters like this. This is a heteropod. It's another snail. Here's this big foot that's been modified to a fin to swim around in. Here's this little shell here, mouth up here, its eye here. They have really weird eyes. Their eyes are one-dimensional. It's just one line that they scan in. But they move their head up and down like this the whole time. And so they scan it in like an old style like CRT television set. And they scan it into their brain. It's like line, and then go back up. And so it's sort of like a weird economical way of viewing the world. These guys can be incredibly transparent. I mean, I've seen them 2 feet long. You can put them in a bucket in front of you, a foot away under bright light. You'll never see them. They're just completely invisible. The only thing you'll see is their little eyes go up and down. Then you get all kinds of different squid and octopus. This is a pelagic octopus. An octopus spends its whole life swimming. It's called Japatella. And they have a nice little trait, which is this little area here of all the arms. In the middle of it's its mouth. And as you might guess, sex in the deep is really tricky, right? It's really, really dark. Most of the animals are pretty far away from each other. They're often pretty rare. And so, it's like some sort of horrible world where there's like a permanent power outage and you can't tell who you are or who you're mating with or what's going on. I mean, it's like, it'd be like going to the zoo in the pitch dark and you have to choose your cage to mate with. I mean, it's just, right? So these guys have it worked out, which is around their mouth, they have a ring, a bioluminescent ring. And there are a lot of bioluminescent things down here, but these guys put a filter around their ring so it makes a completely different color. So instead of being blue, it's green. And it's only the females that do it, and they only do it when they're ready to mate, when they actually need their eggs fertilized. And so the males basically swim around their whole life looking for what looks like a little green lifesaver. And when they see that little green lifesaver, they know that this is a female Japatella who's like got eggs ready to be fertilized. And the rest of their life, I guess they just swim around and eat stuff. Wait for, you know, it's like your whole life is like looking for that lifesaver. You get other cute little guys. Squid are another one of these funny ones where, you know, the ocean is so vast and a lot of them are only like a centimeter long or something. And they just sort of cruise around with their cute little spots and everything else, not really realizing, you know, like the vastness of the world around them. You get weird ones like this that one of my students has worked on. This is the same animal actually just turned about 90 degrees or so. It's a nice little squid here. This eye, if you'll notice, looks really different from this one. They have asymmetric eyes. One eye is much bigger than the other. The eye that's big is always looking up. The eye that's little is always looking down. And it turns out the one looking up, as far as we can tell, is just looking for passing silhouettes and other things to munch on. The one looking down is looking for flashes of bioluminescence. And so it just spends, you know, it's called actually, you know, cockeyed squid, where it just spends its whole life, you know, on a tilt. It's also called the jewel squid because all these little things here are actually photophores and it just lights up incredibly. Then you get another one of these sort of vampire ones. This is called Vampire Toothus Infernalis, which literally means vampire squid from hell. When you look at them normally, they look pretty black and they have these sort of kind of weird red eyes. Look really creepy. All you're seeing here is a sort of like funny sort of artistic shot where you're just seeing one of the arms and the webbing in between the arms and just some funny shadows of the tank and so on. But they're really sort of like creepy, impressive animals. They're able to live in a range of depth we call the oxygen minimum zone. There's a region, usually like, I don't know, about 1,000 or so feet down. There's very little oxygen. Almost nobody can live in it. But these guys have such a low metabolism, they can. And so they're sort of safe. You know, it's like they're living in like an airlock or a vacuum tube or something, and nobody can ever come bother them. Then you get this guy, which is a big hit with a number of people in my lab. It's called Phronema. You're just getting two views of it. Got nice little eggs here. This whole front here thing looks like a forehead is actually its eyes. It's got these huge eyes looking up. And these are great little parasites. What they do is they swim around and they look for a jellyfish-like animal called a salp. When they find it, they chew up the whole inside, tear out all the cellular part, all the part that's actually alive, and leave their sort of like weird gelatinous shell. And then they do some unknown chemical process where they vulcanize that material to make it a nice hard rubber. And then they take their eggs, they lay their eggs inside it, and they literally drive around like a little baby buggy. They get behind it and sort of go around. Then eventually the babies hatch, little babies, and then keep driving around like a little baby buggy. So it's a real kind of like parasitic life where some animal like lays its eggs and then it turns into a baby buggy. And these guys, you can sort of guess, sort of based a little bit on how they look with big claws and all that, and their parasitic reproductive cycle, where at least the rumor is, people go back and forth on it, were thought to be the inspiration for Alien. Then you get other just sort of like weird, mysterious things here. This guy, the eyes up here, you're sort of looking at it curled up here. It's just I kind of like this guy, he's just sort of very shy. Then you get this guy here, cystosoma, which means body basically like a bag or a cyst. Again, the whole front end is eyes, and the whole inside is essentially filled with fluid. There's almost nothing to this animal but a shell and a pile of fluid on the inside with a few like muscle and brain and other things stuck in between. They really are just like like the emperor with no clothes in a way. I mean, there's just like nothing inside of it. You get all kinds of pretty red shrimp. This guy looks really intrepid. Isopods. You get this funny guy here. This is a shrimp that lives in a little container, like a bean. It's called an ostracod. This is the biggest ostracod, which is still not that big. It's maybe like half an inch or so at the most. And it's got eyes, these two eyes here, these are retroreflectors. It doesn't have like a normal lensed eye or anything. It's got these two big headlight retroreflectors that focus the light back onto them, sort of the actual tissue. Sort of zoom around in the deep. You get pretty fish. This is an eel larva. This is what eel larvae actually look like. It gets to be about a foot long or so. Nice little thing here, a snipe eel, will grab onto you. Other funny looking fish, this is called the barrel-eyed spookfish. And for the longest time, we thought this is what it actually looked like. But in reality, this whole front here, this sort of like caved-in head, isn't supposed to be that way. There's actually a gelatinous, transparent bubble that covers the whole front part of this thing. So it's sort of like it's like an animal inside its own little submarine in a way. But that always pops off, and we didn't know about it until we started seeing footage of it from remote subs and things of that sort. This guy I like. This is called a dragonfish. It's got a couple funny features. One, you can see the jaw, how far the jaw can open. You see this tooth that keeps going. It's got these enormously long teeth because once it does finally find something, it really wants to keep it. But these guys are most famous in that they have a red flashlight. Remember I said all these animals down there are red because they're avoiding the blue flashlights? These guys are clever enough to have a red flashlight. And so they can find all the red things. And nobody else can see their flashlight because almost nobody can see red. So they have sort of like their own sniper scope of the deep. Really cool little critters. So whalehead fish. This is a nice sort of mellow looking face. Then this guy who bit me. It's called, I think, a bristlemouth. Pretty big fish, actually. Many inches long. Really, really sharp teeth. We often sort the trawl buckets while the lights are still out to get things out. And so you don't really know what you're putting your hands in. You just know you're putting your hands into like maybe hundreds of animals, possibly a number of which are completely unknown to any human ever. And you're just sort of rummaging around in there. And every now and then you hear somebody go, ah! Because like something either stung them or bit them or whatever. And we all get like weird ratches and we're probably all going to die by the time we're 60 or something. But we had a good time. But this guy bit me so hard and clenched on that I like yanked my hand and was still attached and sadly flung him across the room and had to put him back in the water and all that. And this is him after that happened. You can see how good mood he is about all of it. He has this big photophore here under the eye that he uses as a flashlight. It was about 8 inches. It hurt. Maybe I'm a wimp, but it hurt. Then you get like the anglerfish. This is called Melanocetus Johnsen. Spends his whole life looking at this little ball over its head that's bioluminescent. You can see the eyes, they don't even get to turn or anything else, they're just permanently stuck. It's like all they ever look at. And these guys are most famous for their odd reproductive strategy. This is the female, which looks more or less like a normal fish. The males are much, much smaller, like maybe as big as this eye. And they swim around, and their entire goal in life is to find a female. And when they find a female, they sort of like kiss her in a way on the side, and then meld with her flesh. And then once that has happened, everything about this fish that made it a normal fish dissolves, and the only thing that it basically turns into a scrotum. It's like from then on, its life is to just be a scrotum and continually like pump her full of like sperm. And the female can accumulate quite a pile of these over her lifetime. And maybe in some way she's got a way of like sorting out which sperm she likes and which she doesn't, but she can never reach over to pull any of these off. So it's sort of like the ultimate like parasitic guy. It dissolves its own brain, when it finally shows up. The final weird thing about this guy, Melanocetus, when I worked at a oceanographic institution in Florida, there was a guy who was obsessed with this animal who would call about every 3 or 4 months, sort of on schedule, because he believed that the blue light of this one animal could cure all cancer. And he would talk to us and talk to us and talk to us and get faster, faster, faster. We never really know what to do with him. He just disappeared. So we never could sort that out, but it was pretty regular, like every 3 or 4 months he'd call and we'd all chat with him for a while and that was the end of it. These are 2 more sort of anglerfish, except they hang from the bottom. And I like these guys because, aside from their really great creepy look, these are the things hanging down. They serve a dual purpose. One is, they're fishing, they're putting out bioluminescence to fish for things, but you see they're different. They're also using these sort of pattern and colors of the bioluminescence to, again, find each other in the dark, so that they end up mating, with the correct species. So in this case, you look around and find the right collection of sort of, like blue here, kind of blue-green here in this pattern, and then you aim a little bit higher, and there's the, the one you really want to be with. So, it's a different kind of world, right? So now we've hit the seafloor. Seafloor is, for the most part, monotonously dirty looking. You have to remember that since God knows when, things have been falling on it and never go anywhere. And so all the things on the surface, all the algae, everything eventually gets squished down into some sort of garbage and hits the bottom. And it stays there forever. So it's like this endless layer, this sort of fuzz, with different things living on it. Here what you're looking at is something called a sea lily. They're related to starfish. And just some nice little coral here. This again is another sea lily. They're really beautiful, beautiful animals. Some of which can actually even get up and walk around. Here you have a soft coral, and what's wrapped around in it is a brittle star, which again is related to starfish. There's the body, and here's the endless collection of arms all snaked through this thing all over the place. They're really pretty animals. Of course, you got a shark. I have to show the shark. You see them down there. We sometimes see very, very big ones, like 20, 25-foot sharks. Some of which like pick up like entire like chunks of our equipment and just drag them around. Big, hefty things down there.
This is how deep?
A couple thousand feet. Probably 20, 2,500 feet. And then you get other fish. It looks pretty much like normal fish. This is a grouper style sort of fish, you know, coming in front of the lights of the submersible. Another feather star here. You get this guy here. This is a brittle star again, just completely wrapped up in coral. I like this just because of all the spinnies everywhere. It's sort of like living spaghetti or something. This is a feather duster worm. There are all kinds of different worms that look all kinds of different things. This one, the bottom part here, all lives sort of like down in the ground, and then this whole part like sticks up and does its feeding and so on. It's just a pretty snail, moved from two different directions. Nice deep sea octopus called Bathyt polypus. Again, like a lot of the stuff that's deep that isn't transparent tends to be red. Again, because red is sort of like the new black, you know, down in deep sea. Get all kinds of like creepy shrimp. It's called Eugonadonus or whatever. I like this guy a lot. It's a deep sea pill bug. So how many of you play with like circus bug, roly-poly, pill bug, cute little guys, you roll up, they turn a little circle, they're just like a dog and all that, they're everywhere around you. This is the deep sea version. These guys get like this big. They get huge and heavy and armored. And they're the first thing that show up everywhere. If you throw a bunch of rotten stuff to the bottom of the ocean and put a camera next to it, first thing that shows up are these guys all cruising around. They're like the scavengers of the deep, and they're so armored, and we suspect they taste horrific because nobody will touch them. Even though they're slow and just sort of like moving around. The best even like a shark that'll show up will just like continually try to whack them out of the way. They're like the ultimate monster roach of the deep. Really cool looking eyes and just totally badass. You get rid of just strange looking fish like this, you know, just look weird. Like this guy here is called Chaunax. I think they're also called, common name is stargazer. We found this one in one of the weirdest things in the ocean, which is what's called a brine pool. So salt water is heavier than fresh, and really, really salt water is heavier than normal salt water. There are ditches in the ocean, like a big one is actually the Gulf of Mexico, that fill up with super, super salty water and form a pond in the ocean. They look, you can't see through them, and it's sort of like this weird sort of blackness and weird wafts of things coming up and down as the salty water goes in and out, and animals will snake into them and snake back out of them. But it's basically a pond inside water. And this one was surrounded by just layer after layer of all these strange critters, and at the outside of all these layers was this long row of these guys all sort of staring up, I guess waiting for things to come by so they could like nail them. This is just a close-up of a shark, real close-up. I'm looking into its eye there. Pretty impressive critter. So the last few things here, just want to show you a little bit of bioluminescence. This picture is here just to show you how good cameras have gotten. We used to buy all these like super specialized cameras, and they cost a fortune, and they were made by two people in a garage, and when they broke, you had to find those two people in a garage, and they could never fix it. It just drove me crazy. So this is just shot with a Nikon D700. To give you an idea, this is on a moving ship. It's on the rocking bow of a ship, and I was able to handheld take a picture of the Milky Way. And this blasting light you see over here is one tiny little light from like an oil rig or something like that, way off in the distance, and then you know these all the stars. So, and then all this lighting here. I mean, this isn't a sunset shot. This is dead at night. This is all lit up by one of these tiny two lights right here. So these cameras are really good, which have allowed us to finally take, you know, real color photographs of bioluminescent animals that we bring up. This is one. This is a colonial anemone that has all these nice little polyps and these beautiful lights. The red is not actually the color of the animal. It's just a red LED we shine to show the animal. This is more of that. You're looking at this colonial anemone here, all this structure, all these sort of like little polyps, and then you can see all this sort of funny structure in the bioluminescence. It's not just like a general glow, but there's all these like little dots and dots together and so on. You get this brittle star here. Again, the animal itself is not red. We just shined a red LED to bring out the animal. And then the blue is all the bioluminescence running up and down these arms. And if you were to see this in a movie, you'd see these sort of pulsating patterns as it runs from the center out everywhere. Then you get these guys. I love these guys. It's a certain kind of shrimp that Eugenatus I showed earlier. You might remember the funny little horn it had at the front of this rostrum here. They basically vomit light. They don't truly vomit light because it comes out of her mouth, but it comes out of things very close. It's got a gland on each side of its mouth that have half the chemicals needed to make light. Sort of like a light stick. When you have a light stick and then you break it, you break the glass, it separates the two containers, you shake it up, you get light. That's what these guys are doing, is they have half the chemicals on one side, half the chemicals on the other. They more or less vomit them into the water and they make light, which startles animals, distracts them, confuses them. So in general, these shrimp can then run away and live another day. Here's what it looks like a little bit later. You can still see the animal in there, but now like the whole water is just turned into this big glowing blue spot. So the very last shot I wanted to show, I always like to end with this one, sort of metaphorical for me. So we were out on this plain here. There's absolutely nothing. We're going to the submersible forever and ever and ever, and just seeing sand, 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 dead, 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 nothing, nothing. Then there's this old, torn up old piece of black coral. But on it is an entire community. There are starfish, there are these things called Venus flytrap anemones, there are gooseneck barnacles, there's a whole host of different things. And they're sort of all sharing this one little piece of space, forming a community. And it always sort of reminds me that, given the right circumstances and a little bit of cooperation, you can form a community anywhere, even the most hostile of circumstances and even the most unlikely of ways. And with that, I'd like to stop. Yeah, if anybody's got any questions, happy to answer them. Yeah?
How do you differentiate between, how do you know that it's a snail? I'm sure that there's a definition in Google, but like a snail that looks like a fish, what's the differentiation?
It's tricky actually, because in some of the bigger ways, it looks like a totally different animal. Before molecular biology, they would look at certain features that tended to always stick around. Like snails have a very particular kind of teeth called a radula. And there's nothing else that has this sort of weird, it looks kind of like an escalator of teeth or something like that. And they're the only ones that do this. And so if you see a radula on it, you know it's that. These days we actually look at molecular markers on animals. They'll have certain genes and then we can identify them as such by doing molecular biology. But in the beginning, yeah, it was a bit of a trick and things got sort of reclassified many times. And because the original work was all done with trawl nets, it would sometimes tear things apart. They sometimes thought that two different pieces of the same animal were actually two different species. And then eventually like, oh, this is one animal. So as sampling methods have gotten better, we've learned a lot more about what's actually related to what. Yeah?
Yeah, in that picture, are they cooperating or are they competing in slow motion?
It's hard to know. Both happen. Cooperation is more common in the biological world than often appreciated. There are mutualisms and commensalisms, also another thing. But of course, there's all kinds of secret competition. Like for example, corals and anemones, when they get near each other, create sort of chemical warfare boundaries where they battle it out with each other. And if you do time-lapse photography of like anemones near each other, they'll actually be pounding on each other the whole time. So like if you have a fish tank with like anemones, like a coral reef tank, you think they're just peacefully sitting there all the time. Put a time-lapse on, you'll see them like wham, 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 the whole time they're on each other. So in this particular case, we don't know. Most likely they're fighting really hard, to share this particular space, and maybe some of them are more aggressive about that than others. But some may also have mutualistic, friendly relationships. Any other question?
Well, it's actually touched on it in the answer you just gave. Is it how often do you capture one or more of a species, or maybe a collection that you might have gotten all together, and have in the lab for a while? How successful is that?
It's very difficult. It's very difficult. So the hardest thing for us is to get undisturbed behavior in the deep sea. So let's say if you want to know, let's say like how beavers interact, you just put a little camera inside a beaver lodge and you can learn everything in the world about their undisturbed behavior, unless they're clever enough to notice there's like a GoPro in the corner. But the deep sea is extremely hard. We really don't have an answer for it yet because the submersibles are really intrusive. You know, they're blastingly bright, they make a lot of noise, they have an electric signature and so on. And an example I always give is there was a fish called parallel pipit. It's like a long sort of silvery fish. And whenever you see it submersible, heads down, tails up, it's floating vertically. And people came up with all kinds of ecological hypotheses like how does this animal live, what is it feeding on, why is it vertical all the time? And then later on we put down camera systems that worked in the infrared so they weren't disturbed. We found that they swim like normal fish. And so what you're actually seeing under the submersible is you're probably just seeing stark terror. And that's our problem is we're unable to sort of show up and see these animals without basically terrorizing them. Like, it's very difficult unless we use some of these like stealth camera systems, which we're still developing. And even with those, the abundance of animals is so low that to bring in enough to really see, we generally have to bait the system. And so what you're really learning is what animals do when a lot of food shows up, which is generally so it's really, really tricky. There's very hard for us to figure out what the natural behavior of these deep sea animals are.
So for the most part, you don't sample, you just watch them in situ?
We do a mix. We bring them up and we observe them. We do measurements. We study their physiology. We study their visual systems. Some we do in situ. It's a mix. We do a bit of both. If you go to only about 1,000 meters depth or so, you don't have to worry about the pressure. You can take an animal that lives at 1,000 meters and put it at the surface and the pressure difference is not a problem. But deeper than that, then they start running into trouble and so then you have very special collection methods. But it's a mix. Yeah?
Are you stuck with the direction of your research? Is it mostly just curiosity about these various sea animals or is your research taking in different directions?
It's a mix. I mean, so most of what I do sort of falls under what they call biophysics. I'm mostly interested in how animals interact with light. And so we study visual systems, we study camouflage, we study signaling, we study how vision works at different depths and different habitats. So we're mostly trying to understand the visual and optical world of animals. We also try to figure out how animals achieve different optical traits. Like I said, a lot of these animals are transparent. We're interested in how they do that. Some animals are beautifully iridescent, where they can change color. We're interested in how they do that. And so that's sort of like the primary focus of what we do is we're trying to understand sort of this mix of animals and light. And some of which is like, actually ends up being very applied. Like we do a lot of cataract research. I work with a medical researcher at UNC because a lot of what we learn about what makes an ocean animal transparent can be applied to understanding what makes lenses not. Some of the stuff we do is pretty environmental. We look at how to make, let's say, a fishing system that can catch fish but not sea turtles based on how the visual systems are different. So some things we do are directly environmental, some things we do are more curiosity driven, some are sort of human medical based. It's a real mix.
Aside from photography, how would you say what you do is art?
It's more like sort of the aesthetic of it. It's sort of like what draws me to different problems. It's like I get drawn. I'm a little bit weird, like in my department, in that way, that a lot of what I think about is maybe less practical. A lot of people, they're sort of building upon sort of a larger structure within a field, and there's like certain important questions in that field they're going after. And I've generally been more driven by, I don't know, just sort of what excites me. It's sort of the best way to describe it. So in that way, yeah. In the other way, I mean, what my sort of like, let's say my brother and I, there's just a lot of craft involved in all of it. There's a lot of sort of physical craft and doing these different sort of projects. But the straight up visual art these days, it's mostly photography. When I was younger, it was a lot of different things. I did a lot of sculpture and painting. I still build a lot of things. I build furniture, resources, things of that sort. But the main thing at work is doing photography for a while. They donate a lot of it to like different conservation organizations, things like that sort. Different festivals and so on.
I'm sorry we're out of time, but thank you again for coming, and let's thank Sönke.